Hello, it is Work in Progress Wednesday. I have one thing to talk to you about this week, so I'll talk to you about that in a minute. That's the point of the video. But I will update you on the market, which went quite well. It wasn't gangbusters, it wasn't 1 million people a minute, but it was reasonably well attended. It was a local market, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't have gone to it, because I don't travel. It was a local community market for the Country Fire Authority, the CFA, so it raised some funds for them, got them some community outreach. I think everybody who had a stall there sold at least a little bit, so that was good. So it was a nice day. I hope to do it again next year. Now, work in progress on the loom. It has been, let's say it's been a learning experience and not a saga. Although it has been a saga, learning experience sounds nicer. So I will show you what's on the loom, and then I will come back here and explain why it has driven me slightly to distraction. Quite dramatic lighting today because my lamp has decided it doesn't want to, so I'm using natural light. So pretend that's for effect and not for necessity. So this warp is pattern style artistry by the Patterns, or Patons, I suppose Patons. It's a merino wool and nylon blend. It's a sock yarn actually, but I don't knit or crochet socks because I can't knit for one, and if I crochet socks it'll take about 3 years before they're ready to wear. So this is actually the third weft that I've had on this project. So my first weft, which I've still got on the shuttle, was this, which is a lace weight merino. And it looked okay. I've got a photograph, a pretty bad photograph of how it looked. But because it's so fine, I mean, that is 2-ply, that's lace weight. Let me see if I can get some of that off the shuttle to show you how fine that is. Not in the light, there we go. So that's a very fine lace weight, which I was hoping would allow the warp to shine through a little bit, which it did. But because this is so fine, it's really, really easy to compress it down so that you can't see the warp at all. So it was just showing the orange. So I was being very, very careful to make sure that I had an open weave. But what that meant was that my edges were loopy, so they'd sort of loop around like that. And then when I advanced the warp to weave some more, those edges just shot out, and I had big loopy edges. Now, I'm not one to particularly worry about my edges. I get them neat enough and then I roll with it. But this was just unacceptable. So I thought to myself, I can either go back and fix it, or I can continue to try and do those big loops all the way through. I decided to go back and fix it. But then when I sat down to weave with this again, I thought, this is not actually enjoyable. It doesn't feel good on the loom. So I gave up on that. I've still got this shuttle loaded because look how fine that is. That's going to take forever to unload. I will warp up something to weave with this so I don't have to unload the shuttle. So I went to my local yarn store, which is very small, has a limited selection of yarns, and I picked up this, which is out of the light, which is a grey. And I was hoping that it was a middle enough grey that it wouldn't wash out the colours. I've got a photograph of how that came out. It washed out the colours. It washed them out. Just to the point, I mean, we've got these beautiful vibrant colours, and they were just sort of, if you use a light weft, you will wash out your warp colours. So I was hoping that was middle enough that it wouldn't do that, but it did do that, so I took that off. And then I was thinking, well, I must have something in my stash, and eventually I did find this black cotton. So I'm using that, and it's not looking how I planned for it to look, but it's looking like something, so I'm going to go with it. And now I'm going to go and explain to you all of the troubles I've had with this particular project, which has been, it's taken me a week, because I started warping this up last Wednesday night, so it's taken me a week to weave. Probably I'm about there, so maybe 10 inches. I'm still not entirely sure I'm sold on the black weft, but I am going to continue with it because it is working in a way, if not necessarily the way that I had planned or envisaged, but it is working, and that at this point is the main thing. So let's talk about some of the learning opportunities that I have had with this project. The first thing, so I'm just going to explain something really quickly for people who don't weave. The way that I warp up my loom is to direct warp. So what I do is I tie the yarn to the apron rod on the back of the loom, take that yarn through the heddle, it comes through as a loop, walk that loop the length that I want the warp, and then there's a little peg on the table. I only have one peg. Some people have many pegs. They're very organised. drop the loop over the peg, and that measures out the length of the warp, and that's how I do it. So I measured out, well, I did a lot of calculations. I measured the length of the colour repeat so that I could figure out how many repeats I would get for each length. I figured out how many ends I was going to get. I figured all of it out. I did a lot of calculations, a lot of maths. Even got to the point where I cut a piece of string and marked it with the exact length that I wanted the warp to be to get the colour repeats, which I don't normally do. When I'm warping up, what I normally do is put the loom on the table. You can't see my hand. Loom on the table, peg on the little peggy thing that I have for it, and then I'm 170 centimetres tall-ish, so I go like that and go, right, that's 170 centimetres. If I put a bit down that end and a bit more up that end, I'll have maybe 2 metres. So I do it that way. I'm not usually very precise with my measurements. So this time I was very precise. I got a piece of string, marked it, tied it off, took it through the heddle, put it round the peg, all great, pulled through the first loop, and it lined up with itself. And I thought, yes, I've nailed it. Pulled through the second loop and it was completely off. I hadn't nailed it. So after all my calculations, all of my maths turned out to be useless, as usual. So in the end, the trick was to just move the peg around. Just keep fudging with the peg, move it a little bit closer, a little bit further away, and eventually things started to line up. It's not a perfect line up, but it is good enough. It's as much as I wanted it to line up, so I'm okay with it. So it is a little bit longer than I expected it to be, but it's okay. Then my second issue was after I'd warped up, I was looking at it and I'd tied it off. I was ready to start weaving. I sat down to do it and thought, this is the wrong heddle. So what I'd done was put it through a 7.5 heddle, which is 7.5 ends per inch. And this is a 4-ply yarn, so it is happier in a 10 or even a 12 dent, so 10 ends or 12 ends per inch. So maybe I do have a 12 dent. I was going to say I don't have a 12 dent, but I feel like I do. I'll have to check. Anyway, so what I did then was take the 7.5 heddle and swap it for a 10 dent heddle. Not difficult to do, but time consuming and a little bit tedious. So that was the second thing. Happier with that width between the threads, right? Then I went through all the weft problems. The orange didn't work. It looked fine. It was fine, but I've explained it all when you were looking at the loom. So all of the weft problems, and now I am rolling with it, and it is okay, and it is going ahead. It's going ahead. It is going to get finished. So the other thing I have now, of course, is 2 shuttles. One of them is loaded with the orange, and one of them is loaded with the grey. So my next 2 projects will be the orange and the grey in whichever order. I've got things planned for the grey because I found out that I can felt it. And the orange, I think, will just be a lightweight plain weave, very, very fine thread scarf. But that is where I'm at. I have the one thing in progress. And I started warping this up last Wednesday night. I got it warped on Thursday night. I changed the heddle on Friday night, and then I've been sort of playing with the different weft colours since then. So I'm enjoying it, but I'm also a little bit over it. So I'm looking forward to finishing it. But that is what I have for you this week, my learning experience weave. I think I would like to play with this yarn again, not necessarily in that colourway, but to get that pooling effect, and maybe try with the same yarn as the weft and see what happens there. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with anything. And hopefully by next week I will have this off the loom and something else on the loom. But if not, you can just see where I'm up to with it. Thank you so much for listening to me blather on about my weaving woes. Not woes. I've had a nice time. I love all this stuff, as I said. I think I said. I don't know. I had to do a couple of takes because somebody went past on a motorbike. Really rude. Anyway, you take care of yourself. I'm going to go back to the loom, and I will see you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.